Hello and welcome to Georgia Tech's virtual town hall series. Glad you were able to join us this afternoon. I'm Renee Kapkowski, Vice President of Institute Communications. Today's town hall is for a campus-wide audience, students, faculty, and staff, and we'll focus most heavily on how Georgia Tech is moving forward in our return to campus, particularly around the return to the fall semester that's coming up. I'm joined today by President Cabrera, Executive Vice President of Administration and Finance, Kelly Fox, Dean Stein, our Dean of Students and Vice President of Student Life, as well as Colin Potts, our Vice Provost of Undergraduate Enrollment, and Dr. Larry Jacobs, our Associate Director of Undergraduate and Academic Affairs. As we have done in the past and will continue to do, many of you have submitted questions, so we'll try to get to as many of those as possible during this session. We will the live chat, so feel free to there and we'll try to get posted on the Think Forward website. Following the you follow up and get more information. And tomorrow there will be a town hall dedicated to research. So be aware that that audience will be covered more deeply there. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Cabrera to give us some opening remarks, and then Dr. Bross will follow and we'll open it to Q&A behind that.
Well, thank you, Renee. Thank you very much, and thank you all for dialing in and for a quick catch up on mostly, I think, on what we're doing to return to campus this fall in a safe way. And I want to start by thanking all of the members of the task force, first of all, that has been chaired by Frank Neville, but I think all the members from the academic side, from virtually all the administrative departments on the research side. I mean, it's been just an amazing amount of work and hours to try to put together a plan that will allow us to go back, to restart all of our activities, to deliver on the very important work that we need to do on the education side, on the research side, but do that in a way that really minimizes the health risk for all the members of our community. And needless to say, it's not going to be easy, and we have to continue to be humble about what we know and what we don't know, and be ready to change course depending on how things evolve in the next few weeks, and know that we have to keep several contingencies in the back pocket in case there's a heightened risk or a new wave of contagion, and maybe we need to make different decisions. But right now, as you know, and as we have announced, our goal is to return to campus in the fall. And as of now, in fact, you may have received it, and if not, you will be receiving it in the next few minutes. We have a new communication that has been sent out with some details about our plans on how we're going to do this safely. The key of this plan, as you will see, is that it requires everybody's participation. We will make some changes to our calendar. We'll make some changes to delivery formats. We'll make some procedural changes and some protocols in terms of cleaning and disinfecting and testing and case tracing and isolation and all the areas that we can act on. But more importantly than any of the above is going to be everybody's commitment to a certain set of behaviors. So I think sometimes we talk about going back to normal is really not going to be normal if you define normal as how we were working on our campus just 4 or 5 months ago. It would be a new form of interaction, a new form of learning and research. But I have no doubt that with everybody's participation, we really keep we can keep moving forward and delivering on the very, very important work that we have. The plan has some very important elements, and again, those are sort of laid out in the email that you should be receiving right now. Some of those changes have to do with the calendar, not unlike what you may have heard in other universities across the nation. We're going to have a little bit of a compressed calendar to avoid unnecessary travel. So we will start the semester on time, but there will be no fall break, and then we will end all the residential part of our courses by Thanksgiving. So those people who travel, they don't need to return to campus. There are other changes in the ways and the provost will mention a little bit of how different courses will adapt. We've created sort of a few schemes, if you will, or frameworks that the faculty are going to have to be creative and depending on the discipline and how they're going to adjust those frameworks to the nature of their discipline. And as you heard from Renee, there will be some more details on the research side and different protocols that will be discussed tomorrow at a different town hall. But very, very importantly is going to be what our personal behavior. It has been very clear and made very clear by the experts that the best thing that we can do to slow down the rate of contagion for COVID-19 is first to maintain a reasonable physical distance. By the way, I'm going to retire the term, even though it's still the term of social distancing, because I feel like it's not a great term. Socially, we need to remain connected as we have done throughout these months. It's just the physical distance that we need to keep at a sort of a 1 meter or more. So, and that is something that cannot be enforced through any kind of rule. It's something that requires everybody's commitment. And in spaces where it is hard to maintain that distance, we all need to commit to wearing facial coverings, masks. And again, it's been made very, very clear by researchers and epidemiologists and experts that the mask is probably one of the best protections that we have. And when you wear a mask, not only you're protecting yourself, actually the biggest protection is for those around you. If you cough, if you sneeze, if you yell, if you sing, it is far less likely that if you happen to be sick and you didn't know it, you are protecting everybody around you. So we're going to encourage, we're going to campaign our community to make sure that we create an expectation that we're all going to wear our face masks when we're indoors, or even if we're outdoors in places where it's impossible or not feasible to maintain that physical distance. The face coverings are going to be a great tool. There are also other interventions that the task force has put together. We're exploring how to really amplify or the number of tests that we can perform. As it turns out, several of our labs have the technical capabilities of performing these viral tests, and yet it is complex because you do need a CLIA certification to be able to issue a valid clinical diagnosis, and we're seeking that certification and working with the system and with the public health authorities to try to figure out how we can have as abundant access to testing as we can. Whenever we detect a case, of course, it's essential that we engage in very effective and very quick contact tracing to make sure that we can warn anybody who's been in touch with that person. The state is building up some capacity in contact tracing, but we all know that for contact tracing to be as effective as it can be, it also needs to be informed by the nature of the interactions and the life of a community like ours. So we're going to figure out how to combine our resources with whatever resources that are available from the state to provide the most effective contact tracing that we can. And again, other measures will evolve the way dining and housing and details. Some of the details are in the communication that you will be receiving. Some details, additional details, will be coming in the next few days and weeks. But meanwhile, maybe what I'll do is I'll pause here. There'll be a chance for additional commentary in the Q&A section, and let me pass it on to our provost, Rafael Braz, to give us a little bit more detail on the implications for the teaching side. Rafael?
Dr. Braz, you're still muted.
Dr. Braz, I think.
I apologize to everybody. I don't know how many times I've done this, and this is the first time I make that mistake. But anyway, let me just start again. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad you joined us. I hope you are all well. Needless to say, we, like you, are eager to have as much clarity as possible going forward, and hopefully this type of meeting will help, as well as the communication you'll be getting today. President Cabrera spoke about many of the changes that are occurring. Let me focus a little bit on the academic side, beginning with the calendar. The calendar, in essence, in terms of dates of beginning and end, and contact hours and all that will remain effectively the same, but there are some significant changes throughout. One is that the fall break 2 days off will not be there. And the reason for that is to be able to complete the face-to-face instruction phase of the semester by Thanksgiving week. So on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, in essence, students are encouraged to do whatever travel they want to do and really stay at home and not come back. The reasoning is obvious. We want to eliminate people going back and forth and reduce that to the extent possible of contamination back and forth from people moving. The assessment period will follow immediately after Thanksgiving, just like it was going to follow in the normal term. So this is really a fairly small change of the regular calendar and schedule. But that assessment will be carried remotely. The delivery modes of classes, they're in essence 5, and I must say there are 3, with one of them having several options. One is the residential, as close as possible to the format that we normally have. The other one would be remote with some limited in-person instruction. So they call one label is hybrid hands-on. So lectures are remote, but bring students to classroom for studios, lab activities, keeping social, I should say, distancing measures in place. Then there's a hybrid touch points where, again, the lectures will be online or remotely. And we will bring the students to the classroom several times during the semester for meaningful experiences. And finally, a hybrid split where the sections will offer lectures both in class and through recordings using classroom technology, but we'll also bring smaller groups of students to a classroom at predetermined times. The whole idea of this is to, which is the philosophy behind most of this effort, is to make sure that we have as much face-to-face interaction with the students and hence approximate the normal semester. Then there's the remote programs. The remote programs, we already have existing remote programs like the OMS series, and they will be continue to be delivered completely online. In rare exceptions, and that is yet to be determined, maybe other possibilities will occur, but at the moment, that's what we have in mind. Classroom space, in order to maintain distancing, the matching of the physical space and the needs is a very, very difficult task. Hence the need to have these different modalities, but the whole idea is to those courses and classes that require, because of their nature, to have in-person delivery, make sure that we put them in a facility that allows appropriate distancing. I will remind everybody that distancing alone is probably is only part of the equation. Appropriate hygiene, and we will provide the tools to do that. And using face masks will go a long, long way to keeping us safe. I am pretty confident that if we, as a community, behave, not only thinking of ourselves, but thinking of the others next to us, that we can maintain the community as healthy as possible. And I think that will be desirable, and needless to say, the outcome we all looking for. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bras. President Cabrera, if you're ready, I'm going to go ahead and jump into some of these questions. The pre-submitted COVID-19 task force plan to address the fact that communities of color and those living in poverty experiencing higher death rates are experiencing higher death rates from the virus. We have students and staff on campus who belong to both groups and are experiencing heightened anxiety.
Unmute. Thank you again, Renee, and indeed, I think that the last few weeks have been extraordinarily complicated and painful to most members of our community, very particularly to Black and African American members of our community, and in a way, these two issues coalesce in an even more complex way of how we have learned that indeed the COVID pandemic also has been impacting different groups differently. So that's actually an excellent point. Obviously, as I made it clear during my very own statement that I wrote in the days after George Floyd killing, Georgia Tech, we're fully committed to doing everything we can to do better and to be better in providing opportunities to people of all backgrounds. This is not a new commitment, but in many ways it has received a new level of attention, which I welcome. I was very pleased when we started the strategic planning process last fall, and when we brought together groups of members of our community through these conversations to shape the vision for Georgia Tech in the next decade, that issues of diversity, issues of inclusion, issues of access were central to most of those conversations. And I was pleased that our community recognized and this is not just students, it's not just faculty, it's every single stakeholder of Georgia Tech agrees to the fact that we need to do better in those in terms of our promise of to everybody to be a place where everybody can thrive. So I very much looking forward to working with everybody to be self-critical, to look at what areas of Georgia Tech are really not delivering on that promise, and to move from words, which I think are important to in this moment, to at least declare our intentions, declare our commitment, to move from that declaration to actions. And in the last 2 or 3 weeks, just like many of you, I've participated in many conversations with colleagues, Black colleagues and non-Black colleagues alike, and doing a lot of listening, a lot of introspection. I was surprised by the level of, if you will, of pain, of dissatisfaction that many members of our community have. Also with lots of practices, lots of the things that happen at Georgia Tech. And if I were committed before these listening sessions, I am even more so, or I have an even greater sense of urgency after these sessions. And while recognizing that this is a journey, and recognizing that prior generations at Georgia Tech have actually traveled a positive journey towards that goal of inclusion, I realize that there's so much more that we need to do. So these two issues, which do interact, both of them are hugely important. Both getting ourselves prepared so that every member of our community can return to work in a safe way, and at the same time continue and accelerating our efforts to deliver on our mission of inclusion, is going to be essential to all of us.
Thank you. While I have you, I'm also going to cover a few of the questions from the live Q&A and some that have been answered that were pre-submitted regarding face coverings. So just to kind of sum them all up together, there's questions about if face coverings are just still recommended, why there's, if there's a reason not to mandate them, and then have we thought through building ventilation if we're just recommending masks and some people may not wear them?
So first of all, in some spaces we will require them, and they're spaces that whether they pose a particularly high risk, or places where it is virtually impossible to guarantee this minimum safe physical distance, there will be areas, and there will be marked and signaled areas where facial coverings are mandated. Following guidance from the system and the state, there's not what's not going to be is a blanket mandate that we have to wear masks everywhere. There is going to be requirements in specific cases, but whether or not they're mandated, and I go back to the beginning of my remarks, and I think this is very important, is whether or not they're mandated, it is in our hands to make sure that we use them to protect one another, and there is no excuse for not putting that on ourselves. I mean, this is the one thing that we each can do to keep everybody else safe. Again, there is a level of protection for the person wearing the mask, but what we have learned is that the biggest impact is what you're doing to protect those around you, in case, unbeknownst to you, you happen to be sick. So again, it will be mandated in some places. There won't be a blanket mandate, but what there will be is a very strong push, strong campaign, and I really want to recruit everybody in our community to make sure that there is that expectation that when we're indoors and when we're in spaces where it's very, very hard to maintain that physical distance, that we just cover ourselves. I think I also saw on the Q&A a question whether there would be masks provided, and maybe I return that question to you, Renee. It's only fair that you take some questions, since you're always doing the asking.
I'm happy to take some questions. So yes, so the EHS within Georgia Tech has made sure that each staff member and employee of Georgia Tech will have a mask. And I know that we are also providing masks for all of our on-campus residents, and having masks available to even off-campus residents to take advantage of. So there should not be a reason not to have a mask. It will be provided. They will be reusable and washable. and will be available to you, and there'll be a lot more information coming around about that in the near future. So thank you for that question. Before I take you completely off the hot seat, there was another strong question in those that were pre-submitted, and I see a few over in the chat about what happened spike, an unexpected spike, or we see things take a turn for the worse with COVID-19. Are we building flexibility into our plans?
Yes, of course, and we once again, as I mentioned earlier, we have a contingency plan, and if God forbid we experience a dramatic increase or again a second wave of infections, or we believe that the risk reaches a level that is not acceptable, of course we would have to return to remote learning. I was this time around. Hopefully, we have a little bit more practice. I've been incredibly amazed and grateful to all of our faculty, to the staff, and to students really for their patience, for how everybody in March, when we had to go move to a remote mode, everybody did what it had to get done, so that the learning continued, and hopefully, and again, I'm really hoping that we will not be in that situation. But should the situation demand it, we will be ready to switch to remote learning once again.
Thank you. Dr. Potts, I'm going to take it over to you for a couple questions as well. One in the pre-submitted is, I'm a Georgia Tech student. I'm living back home and I do not want to return to Atlanta in August given the current circumstances of the pandemic. Do you know if students can choose to stay home for the fall semester? And then also on the chat, I see a similar question for someone who's caring for a family member who's immunocompromised. Does it mean that person has to come back to campus, or are there options there with our offerings?
So those are two different questions regarding students who prefer to stay remote and only take online classes. We're not planning to offer all classes in a remote only mode. In fact, even the remote classes will probably involve, well, most of them will involve some degree of in-person interaction occasionally during the semester. And so we want to be really careful that students understand that we're not moving online as an option, but some courses will be offered in this mode. And it is possible that the student could, once all these decisions have been made and publicized, craft a schedule that is based on remote instruction. But this really isn't something that we're encouraging. The vast majority of students are eager to come back, and we don't really have we are planning a residential default form of teaching in the fall. So I know that won't be welcome to some students, but that's what most students actually are asking for anyway. Regarding an employee, could be a faculty member or a staff member who's caring for a family member who's in a vulnerable healthcare situation. I mean, the CDC recognizes several pre-existing health conditions, including age, which isn't really a health condition, as a significant risk factor for COVID-19. We have provisions for individuals who have those conditions themselves who are employees. There's a process. I just answered a question in the chat, by the way. There's going to be an HR process for applying for an accommodation, and the Institute is really just trying to design this to be as friction-free as possible. It won't require, for example, doctor's letters, just some documentation of the condition. Regarding someone else's healthcare condition who's in the same house, this is a little bit more problematic. And I think the first thing, because there isn't actually a provision for a straightforward accommodation in those cases, there are ways that you can actually, for over a short period of time, manage this situation through special leave policies. But I think the best thing to do is to talk to your supervisor in the case of faculty chair to see whether some kind of, perhaps I shouldn't use the word accommodation, that may have a legal definition, but some sort of arrangement can be made where there's a sort of quid pro quo in that you can fulfill all of your responsibilities remotely. And if there is some kind of teaching that's required to be done in person, there's some arrangement where this can be, you can reciprocate with another colleague. So we're trying to handle those situations in as sensitive a manner as possible. But the area where we have a definite policy is where you yourself are in that healthcare situation.
Thank you. To spread the joy a little bit, Dr. Jacobs, with so few large classrooms on campus, how will physical distancing be feasible for space demands? Can you speak a little bit to that, please?
Sure. I'm happy to speak to that. So our plan is to require. First of all, we're not going to change the schedule. The schedule is set. Students are registered for it, so we're not tinkering with the schedule by design. So students will not have to re-register unless they want to add or subtract something. We're not changing the time between the time to change classes. We'll still keep that at 15 minutes. But what we will try to do is to free up classrooms, and then at the high end, we're going to pick a number, whether that number is 90, 100, 75, where classes above that number will have to move on to primarily remote. And then that should free up some classrooms to basically have everybody size up one, move up one, and then depending on the hybrid type of class you're teaching, it is possible that in your class you will only be allowed to come to class live a certain number of days, and the other number of days you will receive that information in a distance, in a remote fashion, so that we'll take advantage of the technology where an instructor can teach a class to a smaller number of students, but distribute that same information to the entire class.
Thank you, very helpful. Dean Stein, can you talk a little bit about the details around how physical distancing in common campus activities and student organizations and student resources like the Campus Recreation Center or CARE or the Counseling Center might be accomplished in the fall?
Sure. So yes, so I think similar to the classroom setting, what's happening now is that all of the common spaces and social spaces are being analyzed to figure out what is the proper occupancy with the physical distancing requirements and guidelines. So students and student organizations will have a clear sense of that upon return. We will work with them. We ask that anybody that has their own space, whether it's a common kind of lounge in a building, even an academic building and stuff, that they work with the proper people to redesign some space and make sure that, the physical furniture is in the proper kind of physical distancing, or even maybe to reduce the number of people that can be in that space at any time. Student organizations will be encouraged to really consider doing virtual events. If they have to do an in-person event, then they will have to go by the strict kind of guidelines that we've set up, and they will have to require facial coverings and also work with the staff to plan those. If they're not able to do that, then the event will have to be postponed or canceled to a later time. What the goal is to kind of continue to offer a very robust experience for students upon return, but do it in a very different way that we're all going to have to adjust to. I do want to say that the counseling center and care and psychiatry and the health center and the dean's office will be open, and we will be working with students both in a virtual way and an in-person way. Things will be redesigned again in common reception areas and stuff, but it should not impede on students' ability to get the support that they need.
Thank you. And for you to say a little bit more about the details around dining, campus transportation, and of course, housing.
Renee, could you please repeat that? You were breaking up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so Kelly, I was asking you to share the same types of details, but for dining, transportation, and housing in particular.
Thank you, Renee. Yes, I'd be happy to. So in the space of housing, we will be opening housing in the fall. The current plan is to provide a space for those, plan for those that may become ill, that there will be a place for them to be quarantined. We are expecting it to be reduced capacity housing, so you will see more social distancing available. There will be increased cleaning protocols, so disinfecting happening multiple times a day in the shared spaces. And we are looking at other options within the community to partner to offer even further spacing of rooms. In terms of dining, we'll be doing single packaging pickup dining so that we can reduce the interaction in the dining line. And we are offering an increased offering of food trucks as well this fall. So thank you.
Thank you. And while I have you, just a couple more questions. There are a couple questions around students being tested or screened, or what would happen if a student tests positive. Do we have areas for students to isolate away from other students if they're in on-campus housing? Could you speak to that as well?
Sure. I believe that the question that you asked me is, will we have accommodations for students to be housed if they are diagnosed? And the answer is yes. We are planning for on-campus housing that will accommodate for students that are testing positive. If a student tests positive, we also are requesting that they work through the Stamps Health Center and report to Ben Holton any positive tests that may not be on our campus.
Thank you. And then one last question for you around extra sanitation measures that are taking place within buildings. What type of disinfecting are we doing? How has that increased or changed for this new semester?
I apologize, my connection, I'm not hearing you as clearly, but I believe the question is that around disinfection, and we will be increasing the amount of disinfection that we do, not only in our housing space, but also in all of our buildings. So you will see the shared spaces, we have a cleaning protocol in place that will increase the cleaning that is happening daily. We also will have a supply of hand sanitation bottles that are available. And again, just to reiterate some of the messages that have already been said, we really are encouraging the use of face masks, cloth face coverings, because those really do a lot to help prevent the spread. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Dr. Bross, I'm going to turn it back to you. There are a number of questions in the live chat around provisions to be made if a student in your classroom gets sick, or if a student in your classroom doesn't want to wear a mask. Can you talk a little bit as to how that will be handled or should be handled by faculty?
Sure. Let me, if a student gets sick or tests positive, as was stated a minute ago, the protocol calls for them to report to the Stamps Health Center, and they will be accordingly followed. We will provide, as the president said early on, testing for students and for the community at large is the plan. And if you are a student, that's the way you should proceed. If you are not a student, then the protocol is that you, in essence, deal with your provider and your primary healthcare provider and report through the state also of the situation. The case of wearing face coverings in the classroom is indeed a complicated one. We have all the hope that in fact indications that it will be provided for. If a student consistently insists on ignoring public health of the rest of the classroom and the community, then the best way of doing it is to point it out to the Dean of Students, John Stein, and try to deal with it that way. We do not, in fact, I would not encourage you to get into a classroom confrontation about this. I think at the end of the game, what will be successful is the peer pressure, the calling for taking care of the community. And if, again, I repeat, if the student insists and things are in fact to the point that it requires going to the Dean of Students, I would certainly urge that that will be the next step.
Thank you. Dr. Potts, there's a question about if there, in some aspects of instructions, if some of it will be face-to-face, but final exams will be remote, would be required to take final exams remotely if they need it.
I'm afraid I didn't quite hear the very last part of, I know you're asking about exams. Let me first of all say that the semester is roughly the same as it normally would be in the fall and as it was originally published. Because we are cancelling fall break, we have 2 extra days, and normally those first 2 days, as it happens this year, the first 2 days after Thanksgiving would have been the final instructional period. And you'll recall that those days are days where teaching doesn't introduce new material. It's really just to review the semester and to prepare students for the forthcoming exam period. So those 2 days now will be held the week before Thanksgiving, the Monday and Tuesday of Thanksgiving week. And after Thanksgiving, exams will be held in with basically a remote and hybrid fashion. So we envisage that many students will travel over Thanksgiving to family homes, particularly out-of-state students and students living further away in Georgia, and will not return and will take their exams in a remote form. These are for final exams at the end of the semester. I'm not talking about things like midterms and quizzes and so on during the semester itself or during the bulk of the semester. Students who are remaining, perhaps international students, other more local students who don't travel and travel home at the beginning of the winter break after Thanksgiving, 2 weeks afterwards, or perhaps are staying for commencement, which we're still intending to hold at the end of the semester if they're graduating seniors. Those exams may be held in a dual fashion so that you can take them in person or in a remote fashion while you're actually here on campus. So the faculty have a lot of discretion about how they do these things because they are really the people who understand their courses the best. But that's the rationale for this. And did I answer the final part of the question, Renee?
You did. Thank you very much.
Improvising. Okay, all right, thank you.
Dr. Bross, one more for you before I turn my attention back to the president. It's about graduate student safety. And the question is around someone's department has been allowed to interpret the phase 1 return to campus rules leniently. And they're just wondering how there will be consistency in graduate student classes and research, and how we'll make sure to manage that.
Well, if you feel that an individual or a supervisor is not following the guidelines as provided for reentry of research, let's say this summer, then the steps to follow is to point it out to the supervisor. That's always the best thing to do first, if you feel comfortable, and you should. But if not, go to the chair and move that way to the Vice President of Research, who will have a lot to say about that. And certainly, ultimately, HR, if it comes to that. I am confident that we can resolve most issues that way. You certainly, when there's any conflict between faculty and students, graduate or undergraduates, we have in my office Kyla Ross, who addresses those issues personally, and her ability to deal with this situation will also be there. So there are many avenues. So, and the one thing that is most important is we put these guidelines for a purpose, and that's the public health. If somebody is not following them and you think they're being violated, then I certainly would urge you to speak out. And there are different ways where you get attention to deal with the matter. Did I answer all the questions?
Yes, thank you very much. President Cabrera, to you, how much access will the general public have to campus, and will a guideline be put in place for them? We've had a question about alumni who come in to mentor students and any precautions they should take, or just things like the atrium or the open area and buildings that are open to the public.
Yeah, well, the public visiting our campus is going to be subject to some of the very same rules that, we're even thinking about how my own building is going to work out, and we're trying to figure out a way in which we can accommodate the public who's coming in to inquire something, but do it in a safe way. We're having indicators about where you can stand if you have to wait, where you can stand at sort of at a healthy distance. And so in each space, we're going to try to set up protocols that affect anybody coming in, whether it's someone who's a member of our community or a visitor. So definitely, you've heard Dean Stein talk about events that are being organized and issues of physical distancing, of sizes of crowds, of additional safety protocols would apply to everybody. But then maybe Renee, what I would like to add, as I've been hearing some of the questions that you have posed, and also reading some of the ones that many of our colleagues are posting on the Q&A, and I realize that I think some of the answers to those questions have been already thought through and will be available in the communications that you will be receiving. And some of that, honestly, we may not have good enough answers, but I have a couple of things that I hope are useful. One is that we continue to gather all the questions that we get, and I think all these questions help us sort of test and kick the tires of the plan and find areas where we may need to do additional thinking and make some decisions. So keep those questions coming, not just today, but keep the emails. And I get some emails from you, or you can send them to members of the task force. But keep those questions coming, and they may be questions that have already been answered. They may be questions that they haven't really been fully answered that we need to study. But that's my first comment. The other one is that I think for many of the different situations we're going to face are going to require everybody's good judgment and to think of some very basic principles. You know, the principle of how do we reduce density of people in one same space. And in each circumstance, each of us, we won't have a specific answer. And what I'm encouraging everybody is to think creatively and proactively about how to apply those principles. How do we reduce density of people in a closed space? How do we maintain adequate and safe physical distancing? How do we encourage the use of facial coverings? How do we even, I mean, there's going to be thermometers in certain spaces to test temperature and maybe to hopefully identify early some cases. Let's all be sort of proactive in applying. We've learned a lot about how to work remotely. Many of the meetings that we routinely we're having together in a small room with 10 or 15 or 20 of us, we have learned that there's absolutely no reason to have those meetings in that format, that we can perfectly have those in a productive way using technology. So whether it's in the showing flexibility in the arrangements that we use for work, in the meetings that we have with others, showing creativity in how we arrange our offices. I mean, again, keep the questions coming, but also take the initiative, be proactive, talk to your your department chair, to your manager, to your advisor, and try to think creatively of what is the best way of applying these principles to keep everybody safe. Again, this is not going to be all answers coming from the task force or from your leadership. It's going to require everybody doing our best to keep the community safe.
I will second that. As a member of the task force and as the person leading communications, we monitor the questions all the time, every day, all day, and make sure they help us see where we need to do more. So I think it's really important that you keep asking and know that we are monitoring them the best way possible and then using them to move forward. I think you also bring out a great point, President Cabrera. Today's share more details that will be built out behind it, and we will continue to communicate that very regularly through more of these tools, through weekly updates, an email, and through the Tech Moving Forward website. And close out the session. What about those sports? Any news you can share on that?
I think you're breaking up. It's one of those bad internet days, Renee. I'm afraid we're having a little bit of a hard time. But I believe that your question had to do with sports. Is that, yeah, got it. So that's again a very difficult one. So our teams, both men's and women's basketball and football, are already gradually coming back to campus. But what is not clear is what's going to happen with competition. So we've been having very rich discussions at the conference level, at the ACC level, and we're setting up a number of protocols because, of course, you know, football, basketball, these are contact sports, right? I mean, all the things we talk about, maintaining distance, and all that, those are impossible when you're playing football. So number one question is, how do you make sure that the students themselves, when they're playing the game, are safe? And of course, you cannot avoid contact. So there's got to be protocols that happen before the game. How do you guarantee, or at least lower tremendously, the risk that there will be people infected playing the game? But then it's not even enough, and that's just about the game itself. Then you have to decide what happens in the arena or in the stadium. and it is very likely that we're going to have to sort of cap the number of people. If we can have people on the stands, we're going to probably have to cap the number of people who are allowed. But at the same time, it doesn't matter what the ACC decides, because some of our games, including, of course, the Georgia Tech game, it's not an ACC game, it's an out of conference. So if other conferences are not applying the same protocols, then nothing that we decide would apply. So we're really expecting that whether it is the NCAA or the so-called sort of autonomy, the Power Five, the top conferences, that we may have to agree on a number of protocols to really be able to play. So everything right now is up in the air. Again, we're going to start practicing. We're going to start getting ready, but we don't know exactly what it is going to look like. What we do know, though, is that for football, in case you have missed this, totally unrelated. Well, actually, tangentially related to COVID, is that the Bobby Dodd Stadium is actually getting rid of natural grass and bringing back turf. So even if you're a traditionalist and you like grass, there's some very important advantages to having turf, which is that now we can use the stadium for purposes other than playing football. And that means that, for example, we may experiment with using the arena for things like commencement, where we can have a much better sort of physical distancing than we can in a closed space like the McCamish Pavilion. So there might be actually some positive impacts there as well.
Thank you. Well, we look to be right at about time, and it sounds like my connection has not been the best. So I'm going to turn it back to you for a goodbye, and with just a reminder that this will be posted on the Tech Moving Forward website, and we hope if you
all right, I think I'm going
on that topic.
Got it. So well, let me start by thanking all of you for everything that you've done so far to deal with this incredibly unusual and unexpected situation, for everything that you've done to support the task force, and whether you're a member or just the faculty expertise and how it has shaped sort of the thinking and the decisions. It really much appreciated. Thank you for keeping those questions coming, as Renee and I mentioned earlier. Just keep them coming. Keep pushing us to have better answers to some of the things that you think are still not very sufficiently well answered. But very importantly, I mean, just start working in your departments, in your groups, with your manager, with your department chair. Start thinking about how these overall guidelines can be applied to the specific context of what you teach, of your research, of your business area, in a way that can keep us all safe. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's important that we have some sort of rules and changes, but it is far more important what each of us do. The behavioral element of combating COVID-19 is going to be essential. So I look forward to working with all of you, and I hope we have everybody on board as we drive and move tech forward. Thank you so much. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, everybody else, for arranging this town hall. I look forward to more opportunities to converse. Thank you.
Thank you all.